So hello everybody, and nice to see you, nice to meet you. I would like, my name is Paula Ferrer-Bubis, and I'm with the Israeli Center for Qualitative Methodologies. And it's a great pleasure and honor to introduce you to our next panelists who are part of a group, and they will together present us about feeling at home and working together and combining minds and points of view. The members of the team are Dr. Juliana Chalner, Dr. Elish O'Driscoll, and Dr. Virginia Adolf, and Dr. Martina Gerada, Professor Carla Willig, and Dr. Bipasha Ahmed, and Professor Maya Lavia-Jai, who is also the head of the Israeli Center for Qualitative Methodologies. So one of you is going to take care of the presentation and of the slides?
Yes, I'll do the share screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the floor is yours, and thank you very much for taking part in our in this day, and we really appreciate you are here with us today, and we hope we will have an interesting session with questions at the end of your presentation. Again, thank you very much.
Maybe for a moment I'll stay with my my hat as the ICQM and said that it was important for us when we thought about this day of developing knowledge through sharing, through mixing, to think not only of mixing between quantitative and qualitative methodologies, but also within qualitative methodologies. The idea of pluralistic research is something that has been in discussion recently around the world, and we thought it would be very interesting to add that to our thinking of mixing methods. So our presentation today, unlike the other presentation in this day, is going to focus slowly on qualitative methodologies. And now I'll change my hat and I'll start the presentation. Martina.
Okay, hi. I'm going to start us off today. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm using headphones and it might be a bit muted.
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Brilliant, thank you. So just going to say a little bit about ourselves, and I'm going to start us off and just what brought us to the group. So I'm Martina Gerada, and I am from Malta. I'm currently in Malta, thankfully, but I've lived 12 years in London, and that's my home, really. That's my sort of professional and adult home, if you like. The group was very exciting to me because as a counseling psychologist, we often work very much in isolation when we do research. So working within a group and sort of working on qualitative research was something that really interested me. And that's what drew me to it, really, fundamentally. Yes, I think I'll pass on, otherwise I could say this, speak forever about that. And the next one is Virginia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Virginia. It's really nice to be here today. Several things I think brought me to the group. First, when Carla extended the invitation, the thought of being involved in a project that was exploring the relationship between experience and discourse, well, that sounded interesting. And what sounded particularly challenging would be being both researcher and participant. And for me, I don't often get to work as part of a research group, so that sounded as if it would be fun as well. And so I'll pass on to Maya now.
Hi, everyone. So I was very lucky to join the group during my sabbatical year last year when I came back to City University, where I did my MSc in health psychology. And I'm very lucky that we have Zoom nowadays. and I could still be part of the group though I'm back in Israel. Carla, to you. Carla?
You're muted, Carla.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Carla Willig, and I invited people to join this group because I was really keen to create a forum in which we could explore the relationship between experience and discourse, because I've always sort of grappled in my own mind with this challenge of trying to understand and theorize how the way we talk about our experience and the actual embodied phenomenological experience come together and produce one another or get produced together. And this group was an opportunity for me to really focus on that very directly and explicitly. Okay. I'll pass on to Ailish and then come back to Bipasha at the end, I think. Ailish.
Hi, I'm Ailish O'Driscoll. I'm also a counselling psychologist, like some others in the group, and I'm also based at City University in London. In terms of what drew me to the group, I think the opportunity to be researcher and participant and to work in a small group using our own material as data, that really interested me. And it's probably the counselling psychologist in me, but the focus on emotions in particular really excited me, thinking about the relationship between the language we use and writing about our emotions and the experience of those emotions. That was something I was curious to explore. And Juliana.
Hello, I'm Juliana Challoner. I was at City when I joined the group, and now I have moved to a counselling psychology programme at another London higher education institute called the Methodological Institute. We're in West London. I was really interested in joining the group, as well as getting to do some research with colleagues, which is always, I think, enjoyable, and more so than working alone. I was interested in this idea of a dual focus method that combined phenomenology and discursive approaches. And I discussed some of this previously with Carla, who'd been working on it, as she mentioned. And I wanted to continue to explore from my own, in my own experience, how compatible these approaches were with each other, or maybe not compatible. So yeah, pretty much like everybody, I had a variety of reasons for joining the group.
Okay, and I'll come back to Bipasha because Bipasha isn't here today, so I've agreed to speak for her. Bipasha Ahmed is with the Glasgow Caledonian University. And after some careful thought, Bipasha decided to not come to the conference, and she's prepared a statement that I'm going to read out on her behalf to explain her decision. So she writes, I regret that I will not be participating as a member of the Experiential Research Group in the Developing Knowledge Through Mixing conference. I have made this decision in support of the boycott of Israeli academic institutions called for by Palestinian civil society organizations and supporters of justice and anti-racism around the world. These organizations and supporters consider Israeli academic institutions to be complicit in the Israeli state's continuing regime of occupation, colonization, and systematic violation of human rights and of international law. Such violations are demonstrable in current threats to further annexation of the West Bank and the enactment of discriminatory health policies during the COVID-19 pandemic, to name two recent examples. She writes, it is an inescapable irony that the focus of our research group is feeling at home, given the threat to actual Palestinian homes and homeland, the contested nature of home, and how all of this may impact feeling at home for Palestinian people. Therefore, I wish to express solidarity with the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause in supporting the academic boycott of Israeli institutions. Okay. Right, and Maya, our focus today.
So today we want to present to you the process of our own research, which started off as an experiential qualitative research. And as you would hear later in the presentation, turned out to be a pluralistic qualitative research. We're going to first explain what did we actually do and how we step by step develop our research process, because we didn't went through any we developed the research process as we moved on. So we're going to explain what have we done, and then we will focus most of our presentation on the challenges and opportunities that we find in this type of research. Beyond doing the research itself, we also conducted a systematic reflection, which was both personal and group reflection through different questions that we posed to ourselves. And we're going to share with you some of the conclusion of this systematic reflection by looking at the challenges and opportunities that we think in pluralistic qualitative research done by a group of co-researchers who come from different methodological background, different experience, knowledge, and academic background. To you, Eilish.
So, as has been said, one of the initial aims of the group was to explore the relationship between discourse or language and experience through analysing written accounts of our own experiences. And so to begin with, we decided on a trigger to prompt our writing. And we agreed that this would be experiences of feeling at home or indeed not feeling at home. And so we went away initially, and over the course of a month, each of us wrote up 2 accounts, almost like journal entries of moments where we had experienced feeling at home. These accounts were quite brief, maybe from a paragraph to a page, and we wrote them either moments or days or even weeks after the experience. And then we met again as a group and shared these accounts and decided to do a preliminary analysis on one account. We left the approach to analysis quite open. So we each went away and did an individual preliminary qualitative analysis using an approach that we were familiar with and that we felt was suited to the aims of exploring the relationship between language and experience. And so this varied. Some of us did more phenomenological analyses, others more discursive, others more narrative. And the result was 7 very distinct analyses. And we met over a series of meetings and discussed what these analyses told us about the experience of feeling at home, but also the ways in which the different approaches produced different kinds of insights. And we also reflected on how it was for the group member to have their account analysed. And Juliana is now going to read out the account that we chose to analyse first.
So this is an example of a recent experience of feeling at home. Being in the pub with old friends, feeling happy, at ease, in a different country and all the more at home because of it. An ease, a shared humour, shared history and memories, a shared future implied and negotiated. A feeling of being on solid ground, my own opinions feeling stronger than they might do otherwise. Excitement, plans, the possibility for fun, the warmth of feeling connected, affection for the people around me. Things felt light, frivolous. My actual home, though, across the road, felt less real, less like home than the people around me. My memory has a warm glow, and the pub did too that evening with the sun shining in. Laughter, boisterousness, turns of phrase. And the author reflected on this piece. Reading this, it sounds nostalgic, rose-tinted, as though reality has been edited so that I might enjoy the comfort of the memory. The words all point to an ease that may be at the heart of feeling at home. The day's work is done. Put your feet up and relax. Martina.
Okay, so this is an example of sort of one of the analyses that we did, and I'll just read through it. The person doing the analysis asked, sort of above the text, how does this account reveal the lived experience of feeling at home? And the reflections were feeling at home involves established relationships and shared experiences, old friends, shared humor, shared history and memories, a shared future. And then there's a sense of familiarity and belonging, being on solid ground, feeling connected. The pub as home, a social and cultural site, which recreates a temporary home, which has energy and is energizing, with words like excitement, plans, the possibility for fun, light, frivolous, laughter, boisterousness. And then the use of the word ease, which invokes a sense of effortlessness between the people present and enhanced self-expression, my own opinions feeling stronger than they might do otherwise. Now I pass on to Bird, I believe.
Okay, thanks. So this is a second example from our analytic observations and insights about the pub description. And it's one coming from a social constructionist perspective, which is proposing that we come to know the world, the people in it, including ourselves, events and so on, not through any sort of objective, neutral observation, but through an examination of language and discourse. So the idea that knowledge is constructed between people through our daily interactions and the social processes and structures we're caught up in. So for this group member, the questions that were of interest were, how is the concept of feeling at home socially constructed? What discourses are reproduced? So who is excluded, included in these discourses? And what are the politics of space, place in these constructions? And this led this group member to the observation that the first thing that strikes me about this account is the location. Pubs are a contentious issue for me. This is more personal rather than necessarily analytical. For me, they have been, sometimes for me, but certainly for a lot of people I know, very exclusionary spaces. But I think this demonstrates an example of one of my concerns regarding space and place and who they include and exclude. In this account, the pub is very evocative, and understanding pubs is required to understand the context and why it might feel at home. And then there was some reflection in this observation. There are similarities with my account in that there is and here the group members referring to her description of feeling at home, in that there is an appeal to the idea that relations with people is important for feeling at home. There is reference to shared history and memories, making direct references to tacit understanding. Generally, the taken for granted nature of tacit knowledge is something I would want to look into further. We have to share understandings to feel what is being understood. And now Juliana is going to speak more about some of the insights that our analyses generated.
Okay, so what we came up with, well, although the findings aren't the main focus of our presentation today, we thought it would be useful to briefly address some of the general themes that arose from the analyses. And as you've just heard in those previous two examples, we were able to give phenomenological, narrative and discursive readings of the accounts of feeling at home, each of us choosing to use one particular method to analyse each account of feeling at home. So although the accounts tended to be quite short, such as the example of being in the pub that we heard earlier, they provided a really rich source of text from which we were able to generate findings that can be loosely grouped as follows. So from a phenomenological perspective, we found that experiences of feeling at home could be understood as quite fleeting, often lasting for just a few moments. They were time-bound, And they also tended to be spatially specific, situated in particular places or locations. They were also embodied, often experienced and described in terms of the role of the senses that were in play. Sense, sights, physical sensations, sounds, or the absence of them. And they were very clearly subjective and individual. So in addition to these phenomenological readings, it was also possible to analyse our accounts of feeling at home by focusing on the narrative and discursive features, such as how particular contexts conveyed certain cultural assumptions and how these assumptions could be thought of as constituting the at-home account. An example of that would be being in a London pub, which contains multiple cultural assumptions about what a pub is in this context, what it represents in the culture, and its function, for example. Our accounts of feeling at home were often constructed or narrated with reference to other people or relationships, either absent or present, and they can be argued to take a narrative structure, the function of which was to tell the story of the moment or paint a picture that could be imagined by the listener or reader like a still life. The stories told of how the moment came to be understood by the author as representing being at home. And it became apparent that all of our accounts could be read in terms of both the lived experience and the cultural or social assumptions that were present in each account, and that these two approaches might be thought of as being in conversation with each other. Maya.
So one thing we notice is that each method invited different questions, or maybe we came up with different questions and then found different method to answer it. I think both ways. So we thought one interesting thing to do would be to share with you the different questions the group participants put forward in their analysis. So the first one was, how is the concept of feeling at home socially constructed? And what discourses are reproduced and who is included in these discourses? What are the politics of space, place, and this construction?
What is the essence of feeling at home, and how does it fit with or compare with other experiences? And what can we do with such an understanding?
What is the relationship between feeling at home and discourses of feeling at home? Where do we locate the political dimension of this, the exclusion-inclusion aspects of home, for example?
How does our life history lead us to a particular feeling of at-homeness?
Is there a shared essence and process? How do we get to this feeling of feeling at home? And how are the members of this group talking to each other about it? I.e., how do we position ourselves in relation to the phenomenon and in relation to each other?
What makes us decide that an experience can be described as feeling at home?
How does our particular epistemological perspective open up and or close down potential meanings of feeling at home or not feeling at home?
Carla?
Okay. Yeah, so at this point, when we had done our individual analysis and we became aware that each of our analytic explorations individually had actually been underpinned by a different research question, we realized that we had a choice. We could either pick one of the questions and then all of us together use the same methodological approach to address that one question, or we could stay with a multiplicity of perspectives that the group had generated and that are captured in these 7 questions, and we could build on that. And we decided to go for the latter option and stay with a multiplicity, and that actually meant then quite consciously opting for a pluralistic design. So at this point, we just want to say a little bit about what is pluralistic qualitative research before returning again to our specific explorations. So there are some characteristics that I think can describe pluralistic approaches to qualitative research. The first obvious one is it combines more than one method in one study. The second feature, and that could be analytic methods or data collection methods, so what more than one method in one study. The second characteristic is that in such research, the different interpretations, different readings of the same data are seen as complementary rather than competing accounts of what the data means. The third characteristic is that the aim of such research is to produce richer insights than one method alone could have generated. And finally, and very much in line with what we talked about in the previous slide, such research generates answers to more than one research question. Now, becoming more specific in relation to how we actually operationalize the pluralist approach to research in our group work. First, I think we need to just acknowledge that it was really pluralism by default, because we didn't set out to conduct a pluralistic research project. It's something that happened. It kind of organically emerged from our work together. The second thing is that our work was or is analytic pluralism, in that we were not using more than one data collection method, because all the data was based on one method, which was writing our experiences of feeling at home or not feeling at home. But analytically, it was diverse. So it's analytic pluralism. The third descriptive feature of our work was that it was collaborative, so more than one researcher. Our group had 7 members. Again, pluralism could be done by one person using lots of different methods, but ours was collaborative. The other characteristic was that we were using an approach that conducted the analyses simultaneously. So in parallel, we were all working on the text individually, but at the same time to produce these diverse analyses. Other pluralistic research might conduct the analyses sequentially, so that you might move through different methods one after the other. We didn't do that. And then finally, at this point in time, we are still committed to holding our multiple perspectives alongside one another. So this is often referred to as a sort of layering of accounts approach in pluralism, where we weren't not yet trying to sort of integrate or bring together the different readings. We're holding them alongside one another for the time being, but we'll come back to that point at the end. Verge.
So we've along the way, we've faced a number of challenges and opportunities. And at some point, we decided that each of us would summarize the thoughts and ideas that we were having and had been having about the process of being part of the group. And through discussion, we came up with these groupings for our reflections. So for us, important aspects of being part of the group include our emotional investment in the data, in the descriptions that each of us wrote. We also were very much aware of how we grappled with the diversity of approaches to analysis that Carla has just referred to, and the diverse epistemological orientations within our group. Other important aspects included the relational dynamics in the group, logistical challenges and maintaining momentum, the process of learning from one another, and becoming more reflexive. And interestingly, the exercise of doing this really makes clear the shift and evolution from our original focus at the start of the project, which was a questioning of the experience-discourse relationship, to more of an emphasis on the dynamics of being part of this sort of research group and doing this sort of pluralistic research. So that's been an interesting shift for all of us, and we see it as an important focus to maintain alongside our original intention. And Eilish is now going to talk about the first of these challenges and opportunities.
I think we need the next slide. Can I do that?
Maya?
Oh, I think Maya may have frozen. Oh, she's
Okay.
back.
Oops.
I can start to speak to the next slide. So
Hi.
this, sorry, I thought that was Maya. So I'll speak to our emotional investment in the data, and hopefully the slide will catch up. Let me just go ahead. So we're probably always emotionally invested in any research we're doing, but the process of working in a small group like this and actively reflecting at each stage made us aware of the mixed range of emotional responses that we had as researchers and as group members. And there's some quotes on the slide when it comes back to illustrate this. But the topic itself, feeling at home, was an emotive one. We did this work during the time of the Brexit process in the UK and of course the COVID pandemic. And so the personal significance and meaning of feeling at home, I think, evolved for us as group members during the process. And for some of us, the significance of that only emerged through the work and through having this as a research topic. There was also a tension for some of us in being both researchers and participants, the need to be emotionally detached, but also inevitably attached. And that attachment meant having an emotional response to having your own text analysed and analysing co-researchers' accounts. In terms of the first of these, having our own accounts analysed, it was interesting that different analytic approaches seem to provoke different emotional responses. So for example, phenomenological approaches often resulted in a sort of emotional resonance or a feeling of being understood, whereas discursive approaches could feel more exposing or like they uncovered meanings that perhaps the writer hadn't intended or been aware of at the time. And this is nicely captured in the third quote here. I felt uncomfortable to have what had been a felt response to my surroundings so closely read and thought about. Some of us also felt tentative or cautious about analysing others' accounts. As captured in the fourth quote here, this caused me to think carefully about my interpretations so as not to cause upset or insult to others. And lastly, we recognise that the process of being part of an experiential group with 6 other women was something that we enjoyed, and that was challenging in various ways. And this is captured in the last quote. I realise how much enjoyment the project has given me, pushing me out of my comfort zone, sharing ideas, the various challenges of finding the time, pushing myself to think from alternative perspectives. And overall, there was a sense, I think, that this research was something that we all cared about and that impacted us in various ways. And over to you, Virg.
Okay. So perhaps not surprisingly, the diverse nature of our group in terms of the different epistemological underpinnings, different theoretical positions, and different professional experiences that each of us bring to the group has posed both challenges and opportunities for us. And these examples here illustrate how I think most of us felt at one time or another as we grappled with this diversity. So one of us said, our discussion of analysis has at times felt somewhat untethered, and I felt in danger of slipping into an infinite regress. And then another of us said, the different perspectives reading of the data required us as researchers to almost literally take different positions from which to look at and interrogate the data. As a result, listening to an account of a different reading sometimes felt like being dragged away from the perspectival position I currently occupied, and this generated the response of clinging to it. And I think that both observations acknowledge being aware of multiple voices and how that we're trying to ensure that none of these voices are sidelined or lost. But in the process of doing that, it can be quite an unsettling experience. So the idea of infinite regress captures that sense of how one's groundedness, one's usual take of things is disrupted, which can feel disconcerting. And I think both examples speak to how we feel at home in our perspective, and that when we are confronted with alternative ones, it can create a sense of dissonance and a desire to retreat into the comfort of what we know and are more familiar with. However, it is the diversity of these perspectives which has enriched the project. And I'm reminded of the proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm now going to hand over to Maya, who's going to say more on the opportunities that this project has given us.
Indeed. So although it felt often like a kind of conflict between different perspective and method, we also felt that it's still within the conflicts, it's also a collaborative process which bring together rather than further away the different approaches. One of us says, over time, I came to see it as a more collaborative process where each method finding complement and shed new lights on the other. I think different people in the group felt differently about how much one method shed light on the other, but this was quite a common experience, feeling that actually each method of analysis shed light on the other methods of analysis. And beyond the importance of diversity to the research process itself, as a researcher, we felt that this experience has enriched us. As one of us said, the diverse approaches and perspective each of us bring to the table has been challenging, but mainly in good and constructive ways. One positive consequence is that I have tried to look at other material I'm working with from a more discursive perspective. And I think that was quite a general feeling throughout the group, that being part of this research group has actually enriched much of our thinking in all the other research and studies and teaching that we've been doing. Juliana.
Thank you. So a little bit now about how it worked within the group in terms of how we organized ourselves and the relational dynamics. So we started the group without a formal plan of how it was going to be run. Some members have been in research groups before and some had no experience of them at all. The group was initially the idea of one of our members, Carla, but she didn't want to take an ongoing leading role. And just as we've done in this presentation, we really aim to collaborate within a flat structure in which we all held equal responsibility for the work. So we were sort of liberated really by the fact that we worked in our own time. At the end of the day, usually our meetings were held after working hours, and we had no funding, obviously, so we had no deadlines and no fixed goals to work towards, beyond a hope that at some point in the future we might be able to generate some presentations and publications. And this is our first presentation from our work. But we had the luxury of not being able to work in a way that needed a structure in order to get things done. So when there were particular tasks that needed to be completed, such as note making, we tended to take it in turns, informally, depending on our availability and what other commitments we had at the time. And as a group, we can be characterized by differences as well as similarities. Some of the group are already very eminent academics, some of us less experienced. We're all lecturers and research supervisors, and we're all qualitative psychologists. Some of us are counselling psychologists who work as therapists in addition to our academic roles. Some of us are academic psychologists. We're all of us London-based, but come from and were born in different countries, including Malta, Ireland, Germany, Israel, and the UK. Some of us are bi or multilingual, and some of us not, sadly. We strove to maintain a reflective and reflexive stance towards the work we were doing and the group itself. And we actually incorporated a sort of structured reflective exercise into the method as it evolved. And later on, latterly, we've begun to reflect on the ways in which our identities have been coming into our accounts. And of course, as with everything else in the last 12 months, we've had to adapt the way we worked for COVID, and what began as really sociable meetings with food and drinks that we brought and shared at the end of our working days briefly moved to a cafe, and then finally had to take place remotely from our homes, where we really had to sort of start again and work out how to be a group in this new medium. Martina.
Right, so the last point that we're going to discuss is this idea about becoming reflexive. I sort of try to depict it in that picture, you know, the hand painting the hand type thing. And of course, the most obvious thing was that we were both researched and researchers. And automatically that process creates this thing where you're sort of looking at your method and how it affects you and how it might affect other people. So really sort of becoming more aware of the effect of you as a researcher on yourself and others as the researched. There was an increased awareness of the sort of political stances that different methods held and their real effect on what participants say. And again, because we were both participants and researchers, it's sort of quite a direct effect. And as we sort of discussed more of this idea about reflexivity, even in preparing for this presentation, you know, thinking about the fact that we are all women or we come from different places, we had some really sort of interesting discussions about identity positions and sort of the different aspects of our identity and where they came in, you know, a bit like Juna has just spoken about of differences in age or places or language. And I guess the one thing that we thought about quite a lot was, interestingly, this didn't occur to us at the beginning, it kind of happened organically through the process. You know, these tightly held assumptions about what home is and what feeling at home is, even the very expression doesn't quite translate in our different languages. And we had to sort of scratch our heads to try and find a way of saying this, for example, in Maltese or Hebrew, or I don't know. So that was quite interesting in itself. And of course, this process is ongoing, because even as we have these discussions now, maybe in the Q&A, it sort of helps us reflect again about the process and how it's received and how we can move forward potentially as well. Over to Carla.
Yeah, just a quick final point, that we have another decision to make now, as we did earlier, where to go from here. And this is where we'd really like some suggestions from the audience, from you, you know, that have just listened to our story. And essentially the main focus we're wondering about is, should we stay with the topic of feeling at home and explore that in more depth? Should we try to integrate our diverse readings? Or should we focus more on pluralism as an approach? So there are lots of different directions we could now go in. And yeah, we would love to hear from you what you think we might productively do next. Thank you.
We stop sharing now and we open it for questions. Paula, do you want to?
Yes, I can moderate this if you want, Maya. If it will be more comfortable, probably you will have everyone. I must say I couldn't miss one single word. I was like attached to my screen, and the first thing I want to do is to join you guys, because it looks I have 3 million of things to say, but I won't do that. We have a couple of so first of all, thank you very much. It was amazing. Thank you for sharing such a personal experience. I think you have done something that is very it's like a forming, a teaching experience for you, from what you said, both at the personal level, but also at the scholar level and at the academic level and at the professional level, on so many levels, and all that by thinking and looking at home or feeling at home, which is quite a puzzle, because when you started, I was thinking of work-life balance, and then all of a sudden, everything became very, very blurred. So let me first stop here, and I will take the first question. So the first question that popped here was a comment by Leora, And she says, it is a great pity that the Honorable Academy women chose to behave in the way she did at an academic conference where the participants have only an academic interest. It will be very interesting to know if she behaves this way with regard to other countries whose complex domestic policy is not to her liking, including the policy of breeding itself on many issues unacceptable. That is Leora's comment on, I believe that on the decision of not to come to this conference. So I open the questions if you would like to comment on that, if there were some thinkings on you as individuals as well as the group with this question.
Well, I can just, obviously, it'd be nice to spend time also looking at our research and talking about that, because we would like some input to see where we go next. I just, for speaking for myself, I just think it was a really difficult decision. There are I can think of lots of arguments both ways in relation to boycott, and different countries in the world where that might be called for or not. So I think for me, it's a very complex question. I decided on balance to come, but I can totally see Bipasha's argument. And I do hope in future we won't need to have those kinds of decisions on our plate, because hopefully situations like this, won't arise. But currently that is where we are. Absolutely. So I'm not sure if more can be said at this point, but that's how I feel.
Thank you for sharing the whole process. And Hayuta asks, do you consider your research project as a mixed methods one?
So maybe I'll answer, because I invited the group to this conference day. I think often when we use the term mixed method, we just assume we're talking about qualitative together with quantitative methods. But actually there's nothing in the term mixed method that says it has to be a mix between quantitative and qualitative method. And I think this idea that for me was new of pluralistic research that asks questions about what the meaning of mixing between different qualitative methods is also very interesting and challenging. Because if you think, for example, about phenomenological analysis together with discursive analysis, which is something we've been struggling a lot in the last year, it comes from such different epistemological approach that it's almost as challenging as quantitative qualitative. So it's not mixed method in the classic way, but I do see it as a mixed method. And it did, I think the interesting part for us was to think about what the meaning of bringing these two methods together, or different qualitative methods.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maya. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to open the mic and ask a question about this process, this research? Okay. Can I ask a question? Oh, there's another one. Okay. Sarah writes, as a third culture kid, I would find it interesting to see what findings would you show up in a group consisting of third culture children, adults, in terms of feeling at home, or feeling of home, in terms of the feeling of home. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think what we found is that it started off to seem like quite a simple question, and then there are layers and layers and layers of it, and so many different ways of looking at this. So definitely an interesting subject, I think.
Yeah. Yes, and maybe one thing to add on that, I think what is really interesting here is that what Juliana mentioned in when she talked to one slide is that we found that feeling at home is a moment. It's a moment that happens and can last only a few minutes or seconds even. And so it was really interesting to think of it like that, as opposed to a kind of stable sense of I feel at home in London or I feel at home in wherever. And maybe, you know, being from having different cultural backgrounds in the mix, or having a dual heritage or something like that, it means there can be lots of different moments of feeling at home made up of these different dimensions. And it doesn't all add up to feeling at home in one particular place or even in one particular language. I think that's what came out to some extent from the explorations.
So the feeling of at home as not only a spatial dimension, but also a temporal dimension as well, in terms of to how long does it last, or is it something that is constant or something that changes? Brilliant. There's another question that by Iris, and she would like to hear more about the dynamics of the groups and how did you actually grapple with the differences in the analysis of the data?
I'm trying to think of how we did that, and I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we didn't try to integrate. We haven't really yet started to integrate. A little bit like Pat was talking about in the first presentation this morning, we are still in the process of working out whether to or how to integrate the different findings from the different methods. Does anybody else have anything more to add to that? In fact, that's one of the questions that we are really actively still working with, what to do with our results and how we integrate or not, or how we interpret our findings and combine them together.
I think one stage we didn't mention in this presentation was that we took as an exercise to integrate the different analyses. So we asked ourselves, what did we learn about feeling at home as a way to integrate the different analyses? What was interesting is that then we came up with 7 different ways to integrate the analysis, and there was also a lot of variation about how to.
So you already need statistics to open it, to write to write it up, right? Yeah. I think that. I'm sorry, Martina. Go ahead.
It's okay. I was just going to say, I think ultimately we've maintained the position of curiosity the whole time. And, you know, even if my preferred method might be different to someone else's, and obviously within that, a little bit of the political stance might be different as well in terms of how we look at data, how we read and interpret things. You know, staying curious and knowing, oh, I see and that's the idea of pluralistic research, isn't it? When I see it from this perspective, I see what you mean. Come and look from mine. That sort of relational dynamic, at least within the group.
And something I seem to remember when we each looked at all 7 analyses, as Maya said, and tried to summarize what we had learned from all of them. And a pattern that emerged was that the phenomenological understanding seemed to come first. So there was a sense that the subjective embodied experience came first and was then shaped by the context and the available discourses. And I remember we wondered about whether the particular prompt, feeling at home, invited that sort of phenomenological account. Yeah. But I think we've been grappling with how to integrate and yeah, what we can understand by integrating the phenomenological and the discursive, and whether that would change with different kinds of accounts.
Yeah. I must say that when you started presenting your group work, I remembered Philip Wert's 5 Ways of Doing Qualitative Research, the book. Now, there you have a model of grappling with differences, which is, it's like, well, you're all psychologists, so I can say those are like a shared monologue. Okay, so everybody says his piece. There's this, everybody has his or her chapter, and then at the end we have a ba-bam with the insider's view of the story. But I think that your group has much more richer insights because of what Martina has just said. Come along my way, and so I don't think that format is the one that is going to bring about all the richness of the insights that you have came about with this research. I think that you need a different kind of format that will allow also the inter tradition, I don't know, qualitative methodology, and I'm still thinking what will it look like, the integration of even the format of the thing, and I do agree that the question is a very structuring lead to all the products of the analysis, but I think you went far more, much farther than the initial question that its phenomenological spirit, perhaps. Yeah.
I agree with you, and I think another difference between us and the 5 ways of doing qualitative analysis is our group dynamic, which go back to the previous question. And only lately we've reached a new stage in which we have looked at the different aspects of our identities and the role they've been playing in the research process. So I think for me, the notion of pluralistic has received lately another meaning, because it's not only pluralistic methods of analysis, but it's also pluralistic identity positions and how they keep changing. We've been noticing the temporal aspect of this, as well as feeling a tone of our identity playing different roles within the analysis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Mary wants to ask a question. It's here. Mary, you can unmute yourself. I think you can unmute yourself. Okay, maybe she does.
Okay. Okay. Are you thinking? Are you continuing with your work? Are you meeting periodically and still analyzing the same materials? What is the status right now of the group?
Well, I think that's where the last slide, where we're sort of saying where do we go from here, and I think we got to the point where we've got a sense of the options that we have for where we could go, and we haven't decided. We do want to write up and reflect on what we already have, but in terms of data analysis, and I think the main, as I pointed out earlier on the slide, the main sort of point about decision making will be around whether to even think about finding a way to integrate in order to theorize and find a sort of way of telling a story about how feeling at home comes about, that draws on discourse, on narrative, on phenomenology, together, or whether to stay with this idea of switching lenses and the whole process of switching lenses. Like we were just pointing out, that it's not a question of picking up a different lens one after the other. It's that collective process of switching lenses and showing others how to see, and then stepping back into your own. And that whole process is really interesting. And I think maybe we do need to think about whether that is something that can be combined with some kind of theorizing, or whether theorizing would take us away from that. I don't know. I think that's where we are. Yeah, we're not really.
I want to share with you that my feeling is that the reflective issues that come about by switching lenses and as Martina said before, come to my side. I think that is a very powerful tool that perhaps I was thinking throughout your presentation, every single qualitative scholar should undertake in order to keep her own reflexivity for every single project. So once in a while, instead of taking a sabbatical, joining a group and thinking about yourself and saying, stop, look at what you're doing. And this is the kind of way of slow a little bit. I know that is very anti-neoliberal what I'm saying here, but I'm sorry. Say slow down, look at herself, look at yourself, and look at what you are doing. Change a little bit of your position and see if what you are doing is still consistent with whatever you want to do, or however you conceive yourself as a qualitative researcher. So I'm thinking of the idea of the group as a tool for the qualitative researcher. So perhaps that's another take of this group. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Completely. And I have to say that in the rest of the day, we will also have a great opportunity to listen for another example about two researchers coming together for quantitative and qualitative position and taking each other perspective. So
right.
That would be interesting to hear as well. I think we are coming to the end of this session.
Yeah. So I want to thank you all again for joining us and for sharing an endeavor that suddenly is a very personal and something that, as you said, might be very intimidating, and saying that also exposing it and sharing it with others maybe as well intimidating. I hope you felt well and you get out of this experience well. And thank you very, very much. As I shall tell you, I couldn't take my ears and my eyes off each one of you. So thank you very, very much. And I think that you gave us a lot of food for thought in terms of how do we position ourselves vis-a-vis our colleagues. And thank you for sharing with us the pluralistic integration of qualitative research. And I hope we will be able to see where this endeavor goes from here in perhaps in the next conference. So we will now take a break till our next presentation, and we will